Italian government wants UNESCO to recognize Italian espresso as a cultural heritage. But what is Italian espresso? We're going to discuss. Hi, and welcome to Bean Talk. If you're new to this channel, my name is Nick Basket. I'm the editor-in-chief of Bar Talks Online, which is a resource for the coffee and cocoa industry. We typically talk about things like production of coffee and the markets and so forth. But once a week, they let me off the leash and I come here and do a podcast about what I like. And that typically talks more about the consumption side of it and, the making of espressos, which is what I really like to do. And that is very much what I want to talk about today, which is specifically Italian espresso. Okay, and whether in fact there's a difference between Italian espresso and just regular espresso. I mean, what is the difference? You hear people talk about it, but if you actually pin someone down and say, hey, what's the difference? They sort of look around a little bit at their feet and then say, well, it's about the beans and et cetera, et cetera. Some people might venture forward and say, well, Italian espresso is more dark roast or has Robusta. But actually, a lot of people really aren't very certain. So we're going to tackle this in today's conversation because partially in the news, the Italian Deputy Agriculture Minister, I believe, came out and said that he wants the Italian espresso to be recognized by UNESCO as a World Cultural Heritage. Now, if you're not familiar with what UNESCO is, who they are, go check out their website. I can't spell UNESCO, UNESCO, I think. Just go phonetically type something like that into Google and it will cleverly point in the right direction. But it's really got an amazing site, actually. They've got this almost sort of an interactive mind map, and they call these things concepts. So coffee is a concept, and you click on it and then it kind of takes you to all the connected heritage things, not to get too technical, but the things that are in that category, and then you can see what they've got and what's been sort of formally recognized. So I went and had a little look around and ended up spending way too much time on it, but meandered over to the coffee concept. Only two items in there. One was Arabic coffee. I think they called it sort of the welcoming ritual or something like that with Arabic coffee. And the other one was Turkish coffee. So I think there's a fair argument to say that the Italians deserve to have espresso recognized as a cultural heritage. And I'll tell you why. This is what this is about. So first of all, a little bit of, oh God, I'm going to say history. And then I thought, oh God, I'm going to lose everybody if I say history. I hated history. My history teacher used to throw chalk. He was like this. He was like, I don't know, he was like the Kim Jong-un or whatever. These missiles would just fly at you if you didn't pay attention. It'd hit you and they bloody well hurt. But there is just a funny story. Let me call it a story because it's way more interesting than history. There's a story, which is a true story, about how coffee came into Europe, and it actually came in through Italy. So this is where the whole thing starts. And it came through trade. So of course, everything that taste came through trade. And we're talking about the 16th century, so around 1500 and something or other, that sort of time frame. And what was going on was the Muslims were drinking this stuff. And the Christians were like, whoa, what's going on? What's that kind of stuff you're drinking? And we all got around to the church, and the church was like, I don't really know if the Muslims are drinking it. So the Pope said, hold on a second, fellas. He didn't say that exactly. It may not have been those exact words, but he said something like, hold on a second, fellas. Before we ban this stuff, let me have a taste. And so he famously tasted the coffee and said, this is delicious. This is delicious. Well, let's keep it. So they got the green light, and this was in Venice. You had all the Venetian traders, and they actually had all these Venetian coffee houses sprung up, and that's of course where cappuccino came from, with the Capuchin monks put steamed milk in it, and so forth, and the rest becomes history. But we're going back, as I say, hundreds of years. The Italians were into their coffee. They brought coffee over and they were trading it, and then they were drinking it, and they were developing it into new forms. And of course, they invented the espresso machine as well. So They've got history on their side. They've got history on their side for number one. But that still hasn't really answered the question. Well, okay, what's different about Italian espresso? So let me ask you this question. If you were to go into a fancy, expensive specialty coffee shop and order an espresso, and you got what most people considered an Italian espresso, my guess would be that you wouldn't be that happy. Why? Well, because generally speaking, the specialty coffee industry now in the third wave, and we'll talk about waves actually in just a second. Should have said that first, actually, the waves. Should have covered the waves, Nick. But anyway, so in this third wave of coffee that we're in, we're now experimenting with lighter roasts, and we're talking about flavor profiles and different kinds of varietals. But typically, if you look on the back, if you know what I'm talking about, you'll see that it might be Arabica coffee, but it'll be a Typica or a Bourbon Yellow or, you know, one of these other different things. And of course, they can be grown in different ways by different farmers using different techniques, different soil, fermented in different ways, shipped in different ways, roasted in different ways. And therefore, you know, the permutations are endless of the kind of flavors that you can get. And you can get these incredible, beautiful flavors, right? Amazing flavors. And we're all really interested in them. And that's fantastic. And I love that. But I have to say, I also just love a regular Italian espresso. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you were to go to Italy right now, actually you probably wouldn't, right? Because of the whole virus thing. But if you were to have gone to Italy a couple of years ago and you walk up and ask for a cafe, which is an espresso, it's a cafe, there's a few things that you notice to be different. First of all, there's none of this 10-minute preparation la-di-da rubbish, right? It's not rubbish, of course, that's what I do. There's no WDT in there and all the rest of it. It's bish, bosh, bang. They've got a doser. Slap the doser a couple of times, a lever, you get your thing out, tamp it, in, bang, espresso, there you go. And you might add a bit of sugar to it, but that's what you're getting. And it's actually, I was going to say relatively cheap. There's another whole story going on this week as well. The prices are going up and the Italians are furious. But of course, prices are going up because beans are going up. Cost of coffee is going up. Something I talk about a lot. But anyway, so it's relatively cheap. And this is the point about espresso in Italy, is it's democratized. It's for everybody. I mean, everybody drinks espresso. Everybody. Okay, there's little children. There's a few little children that don't drink espresso, but most of the babies are drinking espresso. So everybody out in Italy is like really drinking espresso. And you've got to think that obviously, you know, if you're paying €3 or €4 for an espresso, that makes that difficult to do. So, I mean, I think the cost of an espresso in Italy, God, I'm going to get this wrong. I think sort of €1.50 or something like that. And they do this for in a couple of ways. They can achieve this in a couple of ways. One's obviously there's the volume there, but you still need the margins, profit margins in there. So the way they achieve those profit margins and the way that it's all carried out is that first of all, you typically abide by a regular size of espresso. That is to say, you're using 7 grams for a single, 14 for a double. With specialty coffee, that you get, you know, much bigger. I mean, I typically dose 18 to 22 grams of coffee, which means that there's a, do your maths, Nick, don't make a fool of yourself. 7 to 18. Well, it's, you know, it's, I mean, no, it'd be 14 to 18, 14 to 22. I say it's 50% more coffee that I'm going through. Eat for each shot. So right there, you've got 50% extra margin. And the second thing, of course, is that a lot of Italians will blend Robusta. And by the way, Robusta is Canafora, but anyway, they'll blend that. Let's call it Robusta. They'll blend Robusta in with their Arabica. How much? I've seen it go everything from 80% to 20%, to actually to nothing. Some will use 100% Arabica, but it depends on where you go. Here's key number one. Or number whatever we're at. The beans do not define Italian espresso. It's not Italian roasted beans. It's not darker roasted beans. That's not what defines it. There's actually a specific flavor profile that defines it, along with the way it's made and the way that you drink it. The Institute of Italian Espresso also has a definition. Now, bear in mind, this is translated from Italian. So they say that on site, a certified Italian espresso has a hazel brown to dark brown foam, characterized by tawny reflexes with a very fine texture, absence of large mesh, and larger or smaller bubbles. The nose reveals an intense scent with notes of flowers, fruits, toasted bread, and chocolate. All of these sensations are felt also after swallowing the coffee in the long-lasting aroma that remains for several seconds, sometimes even for minutes. Its taste is round, substantial, and velvet-like. Sour and bitter tastes are well balanced, and neither one prevails over the other. There is no or a barely perceptible astringent taste. That's what defines Italian espresso. Okay, but typically also, it's democratized for everybody, and they do that by blending in typically Robusta beans, which are cheaper. So they actually get about, I believe last time I looked, they get about 30% of their beans from Brazil, probably mostly Arabica from Brazil. But they get another 30% or so from Vietnam, probably Robusta from Vietnam. And then the rest they go to Southeast Asia, Uganda, and places like that, where they're, again, probably looking at Robusta. So they're taking some of these cheaper beans. I say cheaper, but also there's a couple other factors that go into this. Stronger, and often have a lot of texture. So Robusta is quite well known for its crema. So good fresh Robusta will make lovely crema. Robusta is also a plant that contains more caffeine naturally than Arabica. And I could go into a whole nother story about caffeine and why it exists, but it contains more caffeine. And so that's another reason why you don't want to put as much coffee into your cup, because you take your little sip of espresso, and the last thing you want to be doing is getting all jumpy as a result of that sip of espresso. Actually, what they want you to do is to come back at your next lunch break and have another espresso or a couple of espressos at a time. And you can't do that if you're totally wired, right? So there's only a certain amount of caffeine that most of us can take before we start feeling a bit unwell. And so they know that. So there's another reason to keep the level, the number of grams down. So you've got this democratized coffee for everybody, at a price point for everybody, and it's able to do that because they keep the grams down, blend in some Robusta. So that's all it is. It's technically like that. So if you want to make a coffee, that's all you need to do is go and get a Robusta blend and whack it in and da-da-da. Yeah, okay, maybe that'll make you an Italian style coffee. But here's the thing that you got to appreciate as well. And this is the kind of hooking it back into the UNESCO status, is that the way Italians think about coffee, and no, obviously I'm not Italian, so I have no problem speaking on behalf of the entire Italy. But a lot of bars, for example, and they call them bars in Italy as opposed to coffee shops. A lot of bars, you're going to get your cafe, you don't even sit down. They'll bang, you'll get an espresso in, and there's no long waits. They'll make your espresso. It'll be like tap, tap, tap on the machine because it'll be a doser. That's the other thing too. It's not necessarily fresh grinding. The grinds will be in a big doser. But they'll be turning it over pretty fast, so it's kind of not so important. But they'll tap the dispenser 2-3 times. They'll get it in the thing, tamp. There's no WDT and none of that. Tamp it in the machine. Espresso. You take it. You have your little chat with somebody, and you move on. And you might even not sit down. So a lot of times you're standing up, having your espresso, and then you're moving on with the rest of your day. And that's kind of the concept of Italian espresso. And that stayed that way. If you think that the Italians, because they sort of invented and brought the whole coffee to Europe, that they would be at the head of the whole specialty coffee movement, that's absolutely not the case. They're very much still wedded to that style of having their espressos. And I, for one, appreciate that. But let me know your thoughts. I would be very interested to know what you think of as Italian espresso. Do you when you're going and buying beans and you're making your espressos at home or whatever other coffees you're making, but let's say espressos at home, you're making espressos at home. Is it always important for you that you have specialty coffee? Interested to know? Thanks very much for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, take care.